Three kidnappers laughed when Mason stepped out of his battered pickup truck, hands empty, shirt stained with engine grease. They assumed the quiet single father was a reckless driver who had come to save Amelia, the young CEO, locked inside an abandoned riverside warehouse. One gunman pressed a pistol to his chest and sneered that he would not survive 15 seconds. Mason only glanced at the wall clock and calmly told Amelia to get down. Exactly 15 seconds later, all three kidnappers lay motionless on the concrete floor, and Amelia stared, utterly stunned, at the man she thought she knew. Stay until the very end to discover the secret Mason has hidden for years and the true price of loyalty. The story begins roughly 12 hours before the confrontation inside the warehouse. Morning at the headquarters of Meridian Dynamics opened with an urgent meeting about a defense contract worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Amelia was preparing to present a new autonomous navigation system to a delegation of government representatives arriving that afternoon. While the executive team gathered on the top floor, Mason worked quietly 2 levels below in the technical wing, checking wiring panels that nobody else bothered to inspect. He noticed that the West Corridor cameras had been losing signal for exactly 47 seconds every night, always at the same hour, always without explanation. The security department dismissed it as a routine synchronization error, the kind that happened whenever the building's older servers ran a scheduled update. Mason was not convinced. He cross-referenced the outage windows against server access logs and found that each blackout lined up precisely with a login on a secondary server that had no listed purpose. He wrote a short report and sent it up the chain, expecting nothing more than a quiet fix. Jackson intercepted the report before it reached anyone senior and ordered the technical staff to close the matter immediately, insisting that raising alarms before the signing ceremony would embarrass the company in front of its new government partners. In front of several managers, Jackson mocked Mason for turning a loose wire into a spy thriller, and the laughter that followed made Mason the joke of the operations floor for the rest of the morning. Amelia was present for part of the exchange, but only skimmed the report before returning her attention to the navigation demo, telling Mason simply to have the cameras fixed by the end of the day. Mason did not argue and did not defend himself. He simply nodded, then quietly copied the full security log onto an offline drive before anyone could delete it, a habit built from years of not trusting convenient explanations. Grace caught up with Mason after the meeting and asked why he was so certain the outage was not accidental. He laid out 3 details in a low, even voice. The blackouts followed an exact, repeating cycle rather than a random pattern. There had been no voltage fluctuation recorded during any of the outage windows, which ruled out a hardware fault. Whoever was behind it clearly understood how to slip past the automated monitoring system, which meant they had inside knowledge of how Meridian's network was built. Grace admitted that several classified documents had recently surfaced inside a rival company's internal files, a leak nobody in legal could explain. The two of them agreed to keep digging quietly, without alerting anyone above them, since neither knew yet how far the leak reached. Mason was known around the building only as a quiet single father who left work on time whenever his schedule allowed it, a man in a faded work shirt who fixed his own aging pickup truck in the parking garage rather than paying a mechanic. His daughter came up only once that morning, through a short phone call with the babysitter confirming an after-school pickup, a brief and ordinary exchange that hinted at a life he was trying hard to keep steady and unremarkable. He had promised himself, after everything that came before, that he would never again let danger walk into his home. Near the end of the day, as Mason left the building, he noticed a gray pickup truck parked across the street, its engine idling for no clear reason. He realized with a slow, cold certainty that the same truck had appeared near the company entrance 3 times that week, always at a different hour, always gone within minutes. When he started walking toward it, the truck pulled away immediately, tires chirping softly against the curb. He caught only a partial glimpse of the license plate before it vanished around the corner. And in that instant he understood that whatever was closing in on Meridian Dynamics had already gotten far closer than anyone inside the building realized. In the final frame of security footage before the cameras cut out that night, a faint reflection showed someone wearing an executive access badge standing exactly where no executive should have been. That evening, Meridian Dynamics hosted a reception for its incoming partners at a luxury hotel along the river, the kind of event where every detail was staged for cameras and investors. Amelia stood at the center of it all, moving between conversations with practiced ease, while Jackson stayed close beside her the entire night, presenting himself as the man who had every security concern personally handled. Mason was sent to the hotel to repair a malfunctioning elevator control panel in the service wing. Dressed in his plain technical uniform, a stark contrast to the tailored suits filling the ballroom above him. A hotel manager mistook him for a delivery worker and told him sharply to stay away from the guest areas reserved for executives. Amelia noticed the exchange from a distance but was too occupied greeting a foreign delegation to step in, and Mason let it go without protest, focused only on the panel in front of him. While working, Mason discovered that the service elevator had been quietly reprogrammed to open on the basement level without requiring an access card, a change that should never have passed through routine maintenance unnoticed. Behind the control panel he found a small transmitter, hidden with practiced care, capable of tracking a person's location anywhere inside the hotel's internal network. He tried calling Grace immediately, but his signal kept breaking apart, as if something nearby were deliberately scrambling it. Through the crowd near the loading doors, Mason spotted Hunter dressed as a waiter, moving with the stiff, watchful posture of someone pretending to belong. The moment their eyes met, Hunter understood he had been made and slipped quietly out through a side exit. Mason went after him but was stopped almost immediately by Jackson, who accused him loudly of causing a disturbance during one of the company's most important nights. Mason asked for increased security around Amelia and for the basement exit to be sealed at once. Jackson brushed him off, saying that a trained security team did not need instructions from a maintenance technician. Amelia, catching only the tail end of the argument, told Mason to leave the hotel for the night, a decision she would later replay in her mind more times than she could count. Mason left without arguing, but he did not truly walk away. He sat in his truck across from the entrance watching the exits, and called Grace again the moment his signal cleared. She confirmed something that turned his stomach cold, that the executive badge caught in the earlier camera reflection belonged to Jackson's own security clearance tier. Before she could send the supporting file, every phone signal around the hotel dropped out completely. The basement lights flickered and died for exactly 3 seconds. A black SUV rolled quietly into the service entrance using an internal security code that should have belonged only to senior staff. Ryan and Hunter subdued the 2 guards stationed near the loading dock before either could raise an alarm. Connor approached Amelia calmly, claiming there had been a security incident requiring her immediate relocation, and Jackson, standing at her side, steered her smoothly toward the service elevator without hesitation. Amelia only understood the trap the moment Connor drew his weapon. She fought back, striking him once across the jaw, but she was overpowered and forced into the waiting vehicle within seconds. Mason, watching from across the street, saw the SUV tear out of the basement ramp and immediately gave chase in his aging pickup truck, keeping his headlights low and his distance wide. As the vehicle sped away, Amelia's smart bracelet slipped from her wrist and hit the pavement, and it was Mason who noticed, seconds later, that it was still faintly transmitting a signal into the dark. Mason did not call the police right away, knowing the kidnappers were likely running frequency scanners that could pick up any nearby radio chatter. If law enforcement moved in too soon, Connor could kill Amelia and erase every trace of evidence before anyone reached the scene. Instead, Mason sent Grace an encrypted message containing the SUV's plate number and its last known direction, then kept a wide, careful distance behind it, letting streetlights and traffic hide his presence. The SUV wound through several looping side streets, clearly testing whether it was being followed, and Mason anticipated each turn by tracing the industrial district's layout from memory rather than guessing blindly. He realized quickly that the vehicle was not heading out of the city at all, which told him this was never going to be an ordinary ransom situation. Inside the SUV, Connor demanded that Amelia surrender the access credentials to Meridian's defense servers. She refused, telling him flatly that the data was locked behind multiple layers of biometric authentication that no single password could bypass. Connor answered that he already had an executive-level password from someone inside the company, and that all he needed now was her personal confirmation code to complete the breach. In that moment, Amelia began to understand that whoever had planned this had to be someone close to her, someone with real access, and Jackson's face rose unbidden in her mind. Meanwhile, Connor sent a staged video to the board of directors demanding a ransom payment within 2 hours, a calculated piece of theater meant to convince the police that money, not data, was the true motive. Hunter picked up the faint signal still broadcasting from Amelia's bracelet and tossed it out the window to throw off any pursuit. Mason did not stop to retrieve it. He understood immediately that it was a test, and instead kept tracking the SUV by its tire marks, the direction of drifting exhaust, and the pattern of traffic cameras along the route. Ryan spotted a distant set of headlights trailing behind them, and Connor ordered him to double back and check. Mason turned quickly into an auto repair yard and killed every light in his truck. Ryan drove past without noticing him crouched in the shadows between two rusted trailers. Once the SUV's taillights disappeared, Mason pulled an old signal transmitter from his glove box, one left over from a job years earlier, and clipped it beneath a passing delivery truck heading in the opposite direction, sending Ryan chasing a false trail through the wrong side of the city. With the road clear again, Mason continued on toward a cluster of warehouses near the river. He called Grace once more and told her not to alert Jackson under any circumstances, no matter what pressure came from the board. Grace had already been quietly combing through the company's financial records and had found a payment from Jackson routed to a security consulting firm that did not appear to exist anywhere in public filings. Mason asked her to forward everything to an investigator she trusted completely, but only once Amelia was safely out of danger. Grace asked, almost afraid of the answer, what exactly Mason intended to do alone against 3 armed men. He told her simply that he only intended to bring Amelia home. There was something in the calm, unhurried certainty of his voice that made Grace pause, a stillness that did not belong to a man walking into his first hostage situation. Not long after, Grace pulled up a sealed military file under his name and found a single line that stopped her cold. Hostage rescue specialist, mission completion rate nearly flawless. Connor brought Amelia into a warehouse that had once belonged to a shipping company long since bankrupt, standing near the riverbank almost 2 miles from the nearest main road. Hunter set up jamming equipment and took control of the exterior cameras while Ryan tied Amelia to a metal chair positioned in the center of the open floor. Connor placed a laptop in front of her and demanded she unlock Meridian's internal systems. Amelia stalled for time by deliberately entering the wrong code twice, watching Connor's patience thin with each failed attempt. He warned her in a low and even tone that his patience would not last much longer. While she stalled, Amelia studied everything around her with quiet precision. Connor carried a handgun and a tactical knife at his side. Ryan held his weapon carelessly, his finger drifting near the trigger guard more often than it should. Hunter stayed fixed on his monitors, rarely glancing behind him. A rolling door was chained shut near the loading bay, and the old fire suppression system still appeared to be functional. These small details would later become the exact foundation of Mason's plan. Somewhere beneath his calm exterior, Mason understood exactly what kind of night this was going to become, and he let that understanding settle into something quiet and useful rather than something fearful. Mason arrived at the warehouse but did not rush in. He parked several hundred yards away and approached through an old drainage culvert, moving low and slow. He counted footprints in the dust, studied fresh tire tracks, and confirmed there were exactly 3 kidnappers inside. He located the jamming device but chose not to destroy it, knowing a sudden signal loss would immediately put Hunter on alert. Instead, he carefully adjusted its output, creating brief, irregular gaps in the interference. During one of those gaps, he sent Grace the warehouse's exact coordinates. Using a slim fiber optic camera from his toolkit, Mason watched the scene unfold inside. He saw Amelia deliberately provoking Connor's frustration, and he noticed a small trickle of blood along her wrist where the rope had cut into her skin. For a moment, his composure nearly cracked, but he forced the feeling down, knowing he could not move while Connor stood so close to her. Mason created a sudden noise near the rear of the building, and Ryan was sent to investigate. Mason subdued him silently and efficiently, careful not to leave him unconscious for too long. He took Ryan's radio, removed the magazine from his weapon, and left him bound in a shadowed corner. Through the radio, Mason overheard Connor requesting confirmation of the plan directly from Jackson. Jackson's voice came through clearly, proving beyond doubt that he was the one orchestrating everything from the start. Jackson ordered that Amelia be eliminated once her access code was obtained, and that the scene be staged to look like a rescue attempt gone wrong. Mason recorded the entire exchange on his phone. Before he could retreat further, Ryan regained consciousness sooner than expected and triggered the warehouse alarm. The lights snapped on. Connor pulled Amelia to her feet and pressed his weapon against her side. Mason had lost the advantage of surprise entirely. He stepped out of the shadows and into the light, both hands raised and empty, and Connor, recognizing him at once as the technician he had thrown out of the hotel party hours earlier, let out a short, disbelieving laugh at the sight of a man choosing to walk towards certain death. Mason walked slowly into the pool of light at the center of the warehouse, his shirt streaked with grease and dust from the drainage tunnel. Connor assumed he was looking at a desperate single father with no weapon and no backup, a man who had followed a car he never should have chased. Ryan climbed to his feet, furious at having been caught off guard earlier. Hunter abandoned his monitors and raised his weapon toward Mason without hesitation. Amelia looked at him with a mixture of awe and dread, certain he had followed them here without ever calling the police, certain he had made a terrible, fatal mistake. Connor mocked him openly, reminding him that he was nothing more than a maintenance technician, that he held no power here, that not a single person at his company even knew where he was standing right now, and that trying to play the hero would not keep him alive for more than 15 seconds. Mason glanced at the clock mounted on the far wall. In a calm, even voice, he said that 15 seconds would be more than enough. The remark drew a burst of laughter from all three men. Mason turned to Amelia and quietly told her to get down the moment the lights went out. Before Connor could process what he meant, Mason drove his heel into an emergency control panel hidden beneath the floor grating, a panel he had adjusted earlier that night. The fire suppression system he had quietly recalibrated released a sudden blast of high-pressure vapor across the room. The warehouse lights flickered violently and then died completely. In the first 3 seconds, Amelia dropped low exactly as instructed while Mason hurled a heavy bolt toward the only remaining work lamp, shattering it and plunging the room into near-total darkness. Between the 4th and 6th seconds, Hunter fired blindly on reflex, but Mason had already shifted position, and the stray round tore uselessly into the control desk instead. From the 7th to the 9th second, Mason closed the distance to Hunter, locked his wrist, tore the weapon from his grip, and drove him hard into a stack of steel shelving. Between the 10th and 12th seconds, Ryan charged forward with his knife raised, and Mason used the full force of his own momentum against him, slamming him to the concrete floor and pinning his arm before the blade could reach anyone. In the final stretch, from the 13th to the 15th second, Connor tried to yank Amelia in front of him as a shield, but she stomped down hard on his foot, creating just enough space for Mason to knock the weapon from his hand and force him to the ground. When the backup power flickered back on, all three kidnappers lay subdued on the warehouse floor. Not one of them had been killed. Amelia remained frozen exactly where she stood, utterly stunned, watching the way every one of Mason's movements had been precise, controlled, and clearly aimed at causing the least possible harm. Mason moved to her immediately, cutting away the rope from her wrists. And rather than saying a single word about what had just happened, he checked her breathing, her pulse, and the clarity in her eyes with quiet, practiced care. Amelia asked him barely above a whisper who he really was. Before Mason could answer her, Hunter, still on the ground, secretly triggered a small hidden timer device. A red light blinked to life beneath the control desk, and Mason understood in an instant that the entire warehouse had been rigged to erase every trace of what had happened here tonight. He looked at Amelia and told her plainly that they had less than 3 minutes before the whole building came down around them. Mason pulled Amelia away from the center of the warehouse as the countdown continued somewhere beneath the floor. Connor revealed, almost gleefully, that the main door had been sealed with an electronic locking mechanism tied directly into the timer and a motion detection system. If Mason tried to force it open, the countdown would accelerate instead of slowing. Mason had only seconds to weigh his choices. Get Amelia out immediately, keep the 3 kidnappers together as living witnesses, or try to save the laptop still holding evidence of everything Jackson had done. Amelia insisted, even now, that no one be left behind, not even the men who had taken her only hours earlier, and in that single demand Mason saw clearly that she had not lost herself to fear. Mason bound the 3 men together with cord from his own bag and forced them to move as a group. He remembered an old blueprint of the district, once stored in the city's public utility archive, showing that this warehouse had a service tunnel running beneath it toward the docks. The tunnel had been sealed for years, but there was a real chance it still existed. He led the group through a narrow technical corridor at the rear of the building. Ryan resisted at first, convinced Connor would find some way to turn the situation around. Connor, for the first time, began to understand that Mason was no ordinary technician and asked bluntly where he had served. Mason said nothing in response. Hunter admitted, almost as a confession, that the explosive device had a secondary trigger Jackson could activate remotely from anywhere, meaning the countdown was never truly in their control. In a narrow window between jamming bursts, Grace managed to reach Mason on the phone. She told him police units were closing in, but that Jackson was actively feeding them false coordinates to a different location across the river. Mason sent her the recorded exchange between Connor and Jackson. Grace forwarded it immediately to the investigator she trusted. The moment Jackson realized the recording had leaked, he triggered the explosive early. The countdown, which had shown just over a minute remaining, dropped abruptly to 30 seconds. Mason found a heavy steel door leading down toward the old tunnel, but it had long since been welded shut. He grabbed a length of metal pipe and used it as a lever. Connor, understanding now that everyone would die together if the door did not open, threw his own weight against it to help. Amelia joined them, pulling with everything she had. The door finally broke free with 11 seconds left on the clock. Everyone dropped down into the tunnel below. Mason stayed behind just long enough to hold the door from slamming shut, and the explosion detonated the instant he leapt down after the others. The shockwave threw him hard against the tunnel wall. Amelia turned back through the dust and smoke, searching desperately for him. Mason was injured in the shoulder but still conscious, still functioning. He told everyone to keep moving, warning that the tunnel could collapse at any moment. The group emerged onto the riverbank only seconds before the remaining structure of the warehouse caved in behind them. Police and emergency responders arrived quickly. Amelia was guided toward an ambulance but refused to leave until Mason was accounted for. He walked out of the smoke a moment later, helping one of the injured kidnappers along beside him, an image that told Amelia everything she needed to know about the kind of man he truly was. As officers moved in to arrest Connor, he said quietly that Jackson had never wanted only the data. He had wanted Amelia dead so he could take full control of the company for himself. Amelia was examined by paramedics and confirmed to have no serious injuries. Mason needed treatment for his shoulder but refused to stay at the hospital any longer than necessary. Grace handed investigators the recorded confession, the financial transfers, and the access logs she had gathered over the past several hours. Jackson, however, had already erased most of his tracks inside Meridian Dynamics. He claimed publicly that he too had been a victim of the night's attack. Jackson accused Mason of orchestrating the entire scheme himself, pointing to a set of damaging claims. Mason had a sealed military record from years earlier. Mason clearly had the skills required to disable a corporate security network. Mason had accessed the company's internal servers without proper authorization. Mason was the only person present at the warehouse before police arrived. These surface-level facts convinced several investigators to briefly treat Mason as a suspect rather than a rescuer. Jackson went further, releasing an edited video that appeared to show Mason attacking Ryan before any warning had been given. The board of directors, frightened by the optics, pressured Amelia to temporarily hand over operational control. Jackson intended to use that gap in leadership to move sensitive data out of the country before anyone could stop him. Amelia found herself forced to choose between protecting the company's public image and standing publicly behind the man who had saved her life. She thought back to the moment at the hotel when she had dismissed his warning and ordered him to leave. This time, in front of the entire board, she stated plainly that Mason had saved her life and that she would not suspend him, even if the decision cost her own position. Mason did not want Amelia risking her career on his behalf. He offered to resign quietly so that Jackson would have no further leverage to use against her. Amelia realized then that Mason had a habit of absorbing consequences meant for other people, again and again without complaint. Grace found a critical flaw in Jackson's plan. The device that had detonated the warehouse required authorization from a specific internal server, one located inside Jackson's private executive office. The activation logs, however, had already been deleted. Mason explained that deleted data often left a residual thermal trace in backup memory, but only if recovered before 3 in the morning. They had less than an hour remaining. Amelia, Mason, and Grace returned together to Meridian's headquarters. The building was under partial lockdown, though Jackson remained inside under the pretense of protecting company assets. Mason understood immediately that Jackson was preparing to physically destroy the server before anyone could recover it. Amelia used her authority as CEO to force open the executive floor. Jackson ordered building security to hold them back. Mason refused to fight the guards, knowing they were simply following orders they did not fully understand. Instead, he triggered the fire alarm system and sealed off a set of partition doors, cutting the guards off from the corridor without harming anyone. Grace made her way to the server room to begin the recovery, while Amelia walked directly toward Jackson's office to confront him alone. Jackson had abandoned any pretense of composure by the time Amelia reached him. He revealed, almost proudly, that the board had already quietly discussed replacing her once the defense contract closed, and that he believed he deserved to run Meridian far more than she ever had. The instant Grace successfully recovered the deleted detonation file, Jackson pulled a weapon from his desk drawer. Mason stepped between Amelia and the barrel of the gun without a moment's hesitation, and Jackson, backing toward the server terminal, announced that he had already queued a command to wipe the entire system and that only he could stop it now. Mason tried to stretch the conversation out, buying Grace whatever time she needed to find a way to stop the wipe command. Jackson taunted him, remarking bitterly that a highly trained soldier had somehow chosen to waste his life as a nameless technician. It was in that moment that Amelia finally heard the full truth of who Mason really was. Years earlier, he had served as part of an elite hostage rescue unit, trained to move into the worst possible situations and bring people out alive. During his final mission, Senior Command had ignored clear intelligence warnings in order to protect a political outcome that mattered more to them than the safety of the team on the ground. His unit walked straight into an ambush as a result. A close friend and fellow soldier named Luke was killed while shielding a group of civilians from gunfire. Mason completed the mission but refused to accept any honor for it afterward, choosing instead to formally report the failures of the officer who had sent them in blind. The case was sealed, and Mason chose to leave the military entirely rather than continue serving under a system that valued image over lives. After that, he built a quiet, ordinary life for himself, determined never again to lose someone he loved to decisions made far above his control. Jackson sneered that Mason had wasted every bit of his training. Mason answered simply that protecting someone never required a title or public recognition to matter. In that instant, Amelia finally understood that he had risked his life for her, not because she was the CEO of a powerful company, but because he was not capable of standing by and watching another person be abandoned. Jackson grabbed Amelia and pulled her back toward the server room, demanding that Mason drop the weapon he had taken earlier from a guard. Mason complied at once, unwilling to gamble with her safety. Unseen by Jackson, Grace quietly activated the building's backup recording system. Every word of Jackson's confession streamed directly into the security monitoring office as he spoke. When Jackson noticed the recording light blinking on a nearby camera, he fired a shot to destroy it. Amelia used the brief distraction to shove his arm sideways, throwing off his aim. Mason closed the distance instantly and subdued him. The struggle was short but intense. Mason had a clear opening to seriously injure Jackson but chose to stop the moment he was no longer a threat. Police officers arrived moments later and placed Jackson under arrest. Grace successfully restored the deleted detonation command along with a trail of illegal financial transfers stretching back months. Connor agreed to testify in exchange for a chance at a reduced sentence. Ryan and Hunter separately confirmed Jackson's role in every stage of the plan. The board of directors no longer had any way to bury what had happened. Amelia insisted on releasing the full truth rather than protecting the company's public image. The decision caused a temporary drop in the company's stock price, but ultimately shielded Meridian from far more serious legal consequences down the road. Mason was fully cleared. A former military investigator recognized his name and confirmed his sealed hostage rescue record without hesitation. Amelia asked him quietly why he had never once mentioned any of it to her. He told her that his past had never once helped him fix a camera any faster. The simple honesty of his answer left her both moved and quietly ashamed of how quickly she had once judged him by nothing more than his job title. Later that day, while reviewing personnel files with Grace, Amelia discovered something that made her pause completely. Mason had filed his own resignation only minutes before walking back into the building to face Jackson. Once the crisis had finally settled, Amelia found Mason in the technical office, packing his tools into an old, worn box. He believed his continued presence would only keep dragging his dangerous past closer to the company. He had no interest in seeing his private life exposed across every news outlet in the city. Amelia apologized for dismissing his warning at the hotel and for ordering him to leave that night. Mason told her plainly that her decision at the time had been based only on the information she had in front of her. He held no resentment toward her, but he also had no desire to become some kind of media symbol. Amelia offered him a raise, a formal title, and full authority over the company's security division. Mason turned it down, explaining that he did not want to be paid simply for having saved his CEO's life. Amelia realized quickly that money had never been what motivated him in the first place. She asked instead what he actually wanted to see change inside Meridian. Mason gave her 3 specific requests. Every safety report submitted by staff should be judged strictly on its content, never on the rank or title of the person who filed it. Lower-level employees needed a direct route to raise serious safety concerns without fear of being dismissed or mocked. The company needed to fully support the families of the 2 guards who had been injured during the kidnapping. There was nothing performative in the way he listed those 3 requests, no attempt to sound noble. He simply wanted the next person who noticed something wrong to be heard the first time, not the 4th. Amelia agreed immediately, without hesitation or negotiation. She made no attempt to keep him there through guilt or emotional pressure. Instead, she invited him to help design an entirely new independent safety division from the ground up. Mason would have full authority to select his own staff and would report directly to the board rather than through any single executive. He still hesitated, afraid of being pulled back into a world of danger he had worked so hard to leave behind. Grace reminded him gently that avoiding his past did not mean his past would stop finding him eventually. What truly mattered, she said, was how he chose to use what he had learned from it. Mason went home that night and sat with the offer for a long while. His daughter came up only briefly through a small handwritten card left on the kitchen table, never appearing directly in the scene itself. The card simply thanked him for always coming home safely. Reading it, Mason realized he no longer had to become the soldier he once was. He could instead build a system that helped other people avoid ever having to stand in the situation he had faced. The next morning, Mason returned to the office. Amelia assumed he had come to finalize his resignation. Instead, he placed the letter on her desk and tore it cleanly in half. He agreed to stay, on the condition that the new safety division would be genuinely independent, answerable to no one who could quietly bury its findings the way his first report had once been buried. Amelia agreed without a second thought. Between them, a deep and quiet respect had begun to form, something that had not yet turned into anything more than mutual trust and understanding. Whatever grew between them from here would be built on that foundation, not on gratitude born from a single terrifying night. Not long afterward, while reviewing the recovered server logs one final time, Mason discovered something troubling. Jackson had not been the only person who had ever accessed the stolen data. Mason and Grace spent the following days combing through whatever remained of the compromised data. They uncovered a hidden account that had been quietly feeding Amelia's schedule to Jackson for months. The account belonged to an outside consultant who had once worked for one of Meridian's competitors. This person had not taken part in the kidnapping directly but had sold sensitive information for a steady profit over a long period of time. She had spent years building a company on the assumption that power and process were enough to keep it safe, and this was the first time she had let herself admit how wrong that assumption had been. Amelia decided not to bury any part of what they found. She cooperated fully with investigators and authorized a complete audit of the company's entire network. Several shareholders pushed back hard against the decision, worried about the financial fallout it might cause. Amelia held her ground, insisting that a company could not build any real future on top of secrets capable of getting people killed. Mason used a remaining piece of the tracking equipment recovered from the warehouse to help identify the buyer on the other end of the leak. Rather than risk another violent confrontation, he worked closely with police to set up a controlled sting operation around the next data exchange. The broker was arrested along with a full list of clients tied to the operation. An entire network built around stealing corporate technology secrets was dismantled in a single coordinated sweep. Meridian's defense contract was placed on hold while regulators investigated the breach thoroughly. Amelia accepted the delay without complaint rather than trying to pressure anyone into rushing the process. Once the company's new security system passed an independent review months later, the contract was fully reinstated, and Meridian's reputation slowly began to recover. The new safety division Mason had been asked to build finally became operational. He deliberately recruited people who had real talent but had often been overlooked because of their job titles or their unconventional backgrounds, the kind of employees everyone else in the industry tended to walk right past. The 2 guards injured during the kidnapping received full support throughout their recovery and returned to work in roles suited to their strengths. Grace was promoted to lead an independent compliance office answerable directly to the board. Connor, Ryan, and Hunter each faced the full weight of the legal system for their roles in the kidnapping. Connor's cooperation helped investigators dismantle an entirely separate mercenary network operating in another state, a small measure of redemption that did little to shorten his own sentence. Jackson was formally charged with conspiracy to kidnap, corporate espionage, attempted murder, and destruction of property. During his pretrial hearing, he insisted, almost to the last, that his plan had only failed because he had badly underestimated one quiet technician. Amelia told reporters afterward that his true mistake had been believing that everyone around him could eventually be bought. Mason did not attend the hearing looking for any sense of personal satisfaction. He spent that entire day instead running drills with his new team, testing the early stages of an updated warning system meant to catch the next threat before it ever grew this large. It said more about the kind of man he had become than any courtroom appearance ever could. A quiet insistence that preventing the next disaster mattered infinitely more than dwelling on the one already behind him. Not long after, Amelia invited Mason to visit the site where the warehouse once stood, telling him only that she wanted to show him something important she had decided to do. 6 months later, the abandoned warehouse was fully demolished. Meridian Dynamics funded the construction of a new safety and emergency response training center in its place. The building carried neither Amelia's name nor Mason's. Instead, it was named after Luke, the fellow soldier who had given his life during Mason's final mission years earlier. Amelia had quietly researched Luke's partially declassified record on her own, wanting Mason to understand that his friend's sacrifice would never be forgotten or reduced to a footnote. For years, he had assumed no one outside his own memory would ever care what Luke's name had once meant. Seeing it carved into stone above a door where strangers would walk through every single day quietly rearranged something in him that he thought had settled long ago. Mason was deeply moved, though he showed little of it outwardly. Standing in front of the small memorial plaque, he finally allowed himself to accept that he no longer needed to carry the weight of that old guilt alone. Amelia admitted to him that she had once believed power alone could keep her safe. The kidnapping had taught her that power meant very little inside an organization that refused to listen to the people working closest to the ground. Mason told her that she had changed the company simply by admitting her own mistakes publicly, something far too few leaders were ever willing to do. Their relationship developed slowly and without pressure. Amelia never treated Mason as a personal bodyguard, and Mason never treated Amelia as someone who constantly needed rescuing. They had become two capable adults who had earned each other's trust and genuine respect through everything they had survived together. Amelia asked him once, almost teasingly, whether he still counted seconds every time he walked into a new room. Mason admitted that the habit would probably never fully leave him. She asked what exactly had gone through his mind during those 15 seconds inside the warehouse. Mason told her he had not been thinking about defeating 3 armed men at all. He had only been thinking about getting everyone in that room out alive, no exceptions, no shortcuts. That simple, unadorned answer captured the entire truth of who he really was, a man for whom courage had never once been about proving something to anyone else. At the opening ceremony for the new center, Amelia told the crowd that an entire company had once dismissed the warning of a quiet technician, a mistake that nearly cost several people their lives. She never revealed the specific details of his sealed military record. Instead, she emphasized a simpler point, that no one needed an extraordinary past to deserve being taken seriously. Mason stood near the back of the hall, still dressed in the same plain, unremarkable style he always wore. This time, the people around him were not looking at him with curiosity or fear. They were looking at him with genuine respect. After the ceremony ended, Amelia invited Mason to get coffee with her, and he smiled and agreed without hesitation. The two of them walked out of the center together beneath the fading light of a Chicago evening. The story closes on the quiet image of Mason's old wristwatch, its second hand ticking forward at the same steady, unhurried pace it always had. 15 seconds had once been enough to change the fate of 3 armed men in an abandoned warehouse. But it was the 6 months that followed, built patiently on trust and honesty rather than fear, that truly transformed Mason, Amelia, and the entire future of Meridian Dynamics. That is the story of Mason and Amelia, and the 15 seconds that changed everything.